What is really behind the decision by these three to move over? In the case of Mr. Ma, was it Chinese influence in our elections, in our democracy? In Mr. D'Entremont's case, is he still ticked that he wasn't made speaker? The Conservatives weren't going to back him as speaker. In the case of Mr. Genereux, tell us about your personal problems, Mr. Genereux. If they're that serious, why the hell are you still a member of Parliament?
60% increase in mortgage delinquencies, sky high rent, sky high grocery prices. Seems like there's no end to the cost of living in Canada. And it seems like there's no end to the craziness that is going on in Ottawa and our politicians, as a third Conservative has decided to resign, spend time with his family, move back to Victoria, but all of a sudden decide now it's time to join the Liberals because Mark Carney said some nice words over in Davos. Joining us today to talk about that and give his take, as always, the gas man himself, Dan McTeague. Dan, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Ryan, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Wish it was different circumstances. We could be talking about a supercharged new government taking us in a very different direction. But thanks to the short-sightedness and perhaps the misguided views of a good number of Canadians who subscribe to the El Bozo philosophy. Here we have, for a fourth term, a government that looks like it might survive a fifth, a sixth, or seventh term. I despair.
Well, I guess we'll see. But before we get to cost of living, affordability, and the rest of that, what's your initial reaction to Matt Genereux crossing? Like, I was very upset when Michael Ma crossed. I was more numb when Matt Genereux crossed, as weird as that may sound, because I should have been even more irritated just because he told everyone that he was leaving Parliament and going to spend time with his family. What was your take on that?
Well, that was my take. There's a personal matter here that isn't being addressed, and with which Mr. Genereux feels that he shouldn't have to address. It is a minority. He could turn it into a majority. Perhaps the problem that he has requires that he be there a lot longer. He probably qualifies now for an MP pension, but perhaps there is something that requires him to have the availability of the services of a member of Parliament. The 75 points or trips that you could take anywhere in Canada for free, compliments of taxpayer, provided, of course, it's meant for constituents and constituency business and your work back in Ottawa. But if you're not going to be in Ottawa, then where are you going? If you're not going to be your constituency, where are you going? What are you doing with the resources that are given you by the taxpayers on the belief that you're going to be an active member of Parliament looking out for them? You don't just go there, and I did it for 18 years. You don't go there to play tiddlywinks. You go there to actually do a job, and you come back to your constituency as much as you can to be at those events that are critical. You be there. Many people, of course, expect that you act like a local politician. You're a politician, nevertheless. They don't necessarily care if you're 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away in Ottawa. They expect you to be there on weekends as much as possible. Now, what that really suggests to me is that if there is a personal reason why Matt Genereux had misgivings so soon after a federal election, why then now jump into the fire with the opposition, which you campaigned against? I don't think Edmonton, or at least his riding, has a track record for voting Liberal. So there has to be a little bit more than the selfishness of saying, hey, this is in my interest, I'm going to do what I please, without further inflaming what I think is justified public cynicism to folks who are turncoats and who basically believe in seat harlotry. Call it what it is. I mean, you basically say, I'm going to do one thing, and a few months later, you flip your mind, you change your mind. That's fine. You can have a change of mind, but bring it back to the people who elected you, not the folks in Ottawa, the establishment players who want to play a numbers game. This is about the thousands of constituents in your riding who you've just slapped in the face. And so it doesn't apply necessarily to Matt Genereux. It applies to all members of Parliament. Now, on a personal note, I did serve, and I was asked many times to cross the floor to go to the Conservatives very late. In fact, it happened almost once to the NDP, if you can believe it, because of the work I was doing on competition and consular affairs was just that popular. And my reaction was nice, but you dance with them that brung you. More importantly, I always took the view that if you're going to cross the floor, you can do so, but immediately submit your name to the speaker as resignation and call an election. Let the people make that decision. Otherwise, it's contempt in the highest order, and especially if it's characterized by, I have personal issues. If you have personal issues, get the hell out. I'm sorry, I would have that same problem. I had fought, my wife had to look after the 5 kids that we had in our home. I had enormous amount of difficulty getting from one end to the other, from Ottawa back to Toronto, to make sure I was at all those events, to make sure that I kept, tapping my toes to make sure that everybody I looked after could be looked after. But if you have a personal issue, that's fine. Remedy it, but get out of the way. There's a lot of very competent people that can take over. And the worst thing you can do is to perform this act of, I don't like where I am. Some of the people may offend me the wrong way, so I'm going to go somewhere else. No, your obligation is not to your party. It's not to your political career. It's to the people you serve. That's a fundamental factor in our democracy, in our parliamentary democracy. And responsible representatives know that that's exactly how you should behave. Not this kind of idea that I'm going to, change my, my political partisan view based on the flavor of the day. And unfortunately, that flavor of the day is leading to a lot more Canadians from this time last year winding up in food banks, winding up not being able to make ends meet when it comes to paying their utilities, not being able to find jobs, and Canadians generally who know that full well that things have gotten a lot worse in the past year. Not everybody believes it's because of the Orange Man bad of the South doing this, but because of bad policies, which makes this kind of bizarre why General Ma and Don Trudeau would cast themselves into the arms of a party whose policies have utterly crippled the Canadian economy.
Well, and this is the challenge that people are wrestling with, and we we've taken a look at some of these floor crossers. Ma is probably the most highly suspect as to his motivation and what he's getting out of that, given that he, not I think a couple months earlier, was at a GTA event where he was celebrating the People's Republic of China and their anniversaries, and standing behind someone who was singing their national anthem, which, standing behind somebody singing a country's national anthem is one thing, but celebrating the type of celebrations that they were doing at a United Front Work Department connected event, that's where you have to ask some questions. And then all of a sudden, he's shortly thereafter with the Liberals and then on the plane with Mark Carney to China, which they don't want to disclose what the MOU actually said that we sent to China, but that's another issue. But now you look at a guy like Matt Generou, and we've heard from people that he seemed like he was just really tired of being in opposition. He wanted to be in government. He was counting on being in government. The election didn't go that way, and so, kind of like D'Entremont, he seemed to have a mid-parliamentary life crisis, and now he wants to just be in government. Who knows what his motivations are? But do you think, or let me rephrase this, because I was thinking a lot about this, and I was thinking about our Charter 3 rights a lot, and the right to representation. Do you think that a member of parliament that you vote for, that is elected under the party in which you voted them in, when they cross the floor, do you think that is a breach of the charter rights of Canadians, because it violates the expectation of who is going to be representing them and what they're representing in terms of platform and party within the federal government?
Well, on the surface, it does look like it is something that would be, at first glance, appeared to be unlawful, but there's no way in which the Supreme Court could make a decision as to the function of a member of parliament. I think the two are somewhat immune from commenting on each other than the parliament having, or the prime minister having some role in appointing members of the Supreme Court. I'm not sure you could find a precedent that would allow, or at least give give leave to the Supreme Court of Canada to hear a case that would somehow second guess the privileges and the usage, not the convention, but the usage, the practices of a member of parliament, or the privileges of a member of parliament. And that's what makes this so unique, is that members of parliament are given a significant amount of latitude to act on behalf of the interests of the people they represent as their representative within a parliamentary system. But rather than dealing with the clinical sort of what a constitution says, the constitution came well after the practice. I would think that this, really speaks to a rather grave moral concern. Yes, we may opine about whether or not members of parliament should be paid more or less, how they're compensated. There's a board of internal economy that looks after that. But in terms of a member of parliament betraying the trust of those who've invested their confidence in him, those who've won, those who've lost, as the system works, and then suddenly changing their mind, that seems to be a prerogative of members of parliament, a privilege that they exercise. Whether they should be able to exercise that, I think, is very much in question now. Not because it's happened once, not because it's happened twice, but because it's happened 3 times and may very well happen again. I've never seen this many defections in my time, in the 48 years in which I've been actively involved in the Liberal Party, less the past 10 years under a fellow who I think shouldn't be referred to as Justin Trudeau, but in fact Justin Sinclair, and I think you know what I mean by that. But the reality for many of us here is that we are looking at a situation in which there probably is no remedy other than the remedy that the electorate considers. And I think the electorate really has to take this thing under advisement. And maybe next time, ask their members of parliament or their candidates, will they switch if circumstances change? Because we can't have this kind of capriciousness with members of parliament and those who take liberties with the public's trust.
And, we have seen folks pointing back to a vote from 12 years ago where they point to that and they say, well, the Conservatives voted against a bill that would prevent floor crossing. So they're hypocrites and that's the end of it. But that wasn't going to change the balance of power. That wasn't going to, it wasn't going to significantly change the outcome of Parliament, of committees, what have you. Now, our position from the beginning has been, doesn't matter what party you're on, you shouldn't be floor crossing like you. We think it should go to a by-election. But what would you say to folks that no doubt lean liberal that are saying, what are you complaining about? These happen all the time.
Well, they don't happen all the time, and they happen usually under very unusual circumstances. Or if you have something along the lines, I remember a couple of members of Parliament, Joe Camusi and another one from British Columbia, in the period of time in which Stephen Harper took over in 2006, 7 or 8, somewhere around there when he became Prime Minister. But that was far and few between, and it wasn't basically going to affect the balance of power either way. Nevertheless, I then thought it was wrong, morally wrong, and I used my own guide, which was, and I stated so very publicly, I'm sure it'd be found somewhere. If you're going to do that, then the first thing you should do is, yes, I would intend to go to another party, but in order to have the approval to be a representative, I also want to take it to the people, the very people that got me elected in the first place. And I think that's the litmus test, and that's what makes this so much different.
And it's even more strange. You say these happen under strange circumstances. I think they're happening under very strange circumstances because it's not like the Liberals have a 20, 30 point lead in the polls. If you look at the pollsters and come to, approach it with any sort of rational thought, nobody has any idea what the polls are right now other than 50-50, because you have Abacus at 7 points up, you have Nanos at 1.6 points up, and then you have liaison strategies that only seems to show up and project Liberal leads when there is an election coming. And then you have Ecos, which nobody cares about Ecos because of their bias. So, but they're all over the place. And that's what that tells me, is that nobody really knows. So we're just going to call it a coin flip. So how does it even make sense that people are jumping to another party when there's not a overwhelming popular support when it comes to the polls if an election were to be held today?
May have a lot to do with style. I mean, a lot of people were rubbed in his own caucus by Stephen Harper, thought he was strong, thought he was unyielding, would not bend to any type of changes, was very firm and decisive. Perhaps they see the same thing in Pierre Poilievre. I mean, for conservatives, the real challenge is this: they've had, prior to Polyev, Aaron O'Toole, nice guy, but very, very malleable, and someone who was seen by many as being not necessarily representative of the core of the conservative policies, much less the values. And so, you wanted to get someone who was a lot stronger rather than someone who was so heavily tied to say, oh, we should just get along with the liberals. And hey, I think one point in the election, which I thought was very strange, let's lose a few votes in Western Canada on our climate policies because we'll be able to win more in Eastern Canada. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah, you sacrificed those votes out in Western Canada. You certainly didn't pick up on trying to be trendy or cool in Eastern Canada. Polyev is much stronger. He's more direct. He knows his files. He's an extraordinarily good debater. And of course, he didn't come from the perspective of not having experience. He's got tons of experience where it counts in government and in parliament, and that's what you elect these people to. Look, I had jobs in the private sector before I was elected. I've had jobs after I was elected. That didn't make me a better or worse politician, much less a potential better leader. The reality is what you communicate most effectively at the time in which it's best needed. And so far, we've heard from Mr. Carney a lot of baloney. I, a year and a half ago talked about how I was very concerned about how mendacious this guy was, and he shamelessly self-promoted and claimed things he was not responsible for, like balancing the budget in 1997, helping Canada avoid the economic collapse of 2008. When in fact, that was Paul Merton and Jean Chrétien and those in the Bank of Canada, like David Dodge, who'd worked very hard to ensure that we wouldn't deregulate our financial institutions to create the scenario that unfolded in many countries, especially the United States. That aside, I've now heard for a year what the promises of Mark Carney were. And all I have coming out of this is we're getting 49,000, over glorified golf carts coming from China in the name of EVs. We're hearing more and more untenable, unsustainable spending. We're talking about a guy who said he could cut a deal with Trump, never did, and a guy who said that China was a bad country, the most dangerous country, security threat in the world, cozying up to them. So I guess what we have to do is understand a little bit, not so much about Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney and what comes out of that, is that what has happened to Canadians that they would allow and tolerate such a phony explanation of platform, only to have that reversed and do exactly the opposite or produce absolutely nothing. It concerns me that a year into a country that seems to be deepening its economic outlook, it's worsening the economic outlook, that we still have the same old elbows up crowd supporting a guy who says, I can do all of these things. I am doing all these things. Gives wonderful speeches, Tony speeches to the rarefied billionaires over in Davos who sit back, Perriers and chew down on canapes while the rest of us watch our nation floundering. And so I guess what it comes down to is what are these floor crossers really looking for? And what are Canadians looking for? Nice flowery comments, cool, trendy commentary, mischaracterization of what Václav Havel had said, the former Czech president. Is that how we want to run a country called Canada? Or do we want to start looking at things that make Canada very strong, very unique, get it back and right the ship? Because right now, the welfare lines are growing. The food bank lines are growing. We are seeing, a downturn, a major downturn in the real estate market. We know the energy sector is in trouble. We know the automotive manufacturing sector is in real trouble. We know the forestry industry is in real trouble. You can't blame this all in the United States. You sooner or later have to take account for ESG, DEI, net zero nonsense, and other forms of climate bedwetting over the past decade that has reduced Canada. And so if Canadians are going to say, well, we want, and some of these member parties would say, we want more of that, therefore we want more of Mark Carney, well, how much more can you afford to lose? And how much more debt do you want to impose on your children's future and make their future most uncertain? That's the stark difference that was given those three members of parliament. They chose with Carney. So it has to be something more than, if they look around them, they know things have deteriorated. It can't get any better under Carney. It will get worse under Carney because he's taking the same policy as Justin Trudeau, which he had a lot of an uneven hand in determining. What is really behind the decision by these three to move over. In the case of Mr. Ma, was it Chinese influence in our elections, in our democracy? In Mr. D'Entremont's case, is he still ticked that he wasn't made speaker? The Conservatives weren't going to back him as speaker. In the case of Mr. Genereux, tell us about your personal problems, Mr. Genereux. If they're that serious, why the hell are you still a member of Parliament?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the price of public life, right? They say, well, that's my private business. Well, not when you're making decisions at the expense of your constituents. Back to the point. He said, well, I consulted with my constituents. All of these jerks say that they consulted with their constituents. Meanwhile, all you hear is protests and protests and protests, and the fact that they elected you not even a year ago, and the fact that Genereux comes from a riding that no one can remember if it's ever been anything but conservative. Please explain to us, what constituents did you consult? Because he hasn't been seen for about 3 or 4 months, and he wasn't in his riding. So where the hell were you? What constituents would you be consulting to make this very important decision? But that's the issue. We're not going to get the answer to that. But we are in a scenario where it's mind-boggling, and any outside observers are just scratching their heads in what is going on with the Canadian electorate. Does this come down to that, age-old adage of perception equals reality, and Mark Carney and the Liberals, with the help of the mainstream media, are creating a different perception of reality than is actually out there? That this isn't the Liberals' fault. They've been acting correctly this entire time for the last 10 years, and it's all Donald Trump's fault, or it's Stephen Harper's fault, or it's everybody else's fault but theirs.
Well, I can't remember what movie it was, but it's from the 1940s. That's how far back it goes. And it says everyone's got an angle. And those in the media who are propping this up and saying there's nothing here, whether they're influencers or whatnot, you got to ask what buys them. What is it? What's in this for them? I don't mean to be rough with my media friends. I used to do 30, 40 media interviews a day on energy prices, how important they were as they led to much higher prices for everything, including food. But they don't want to talk about that because apparently we don't have an inflationary problem. It's certainly not caused by net zero nonsense and the pursuit of things that have been highly damaging to a resource-based economy like ours. But what does surprise me is that no one bothers to ask the question. Those who should be holding these people to account, particularly in the fifth estate, the media, the legacy media, let's have a discussion about how much they're paid, how much the federal Liberals are giving to their media friends. And I'm not talking the talking heads that we see, on TV all the time. Every journalist in this country whose company receives money from the federal government is getting $20,000-$30,000 a head. So you got to say, if it comes down to it, yes, maybe a lot of them have a good reason to ensure that they feather their own nests. They know which side of the bread is buttered, and that is not a way to run a democracy, let alone hold our democracy to account. And so you have this bizarre, perverse effect where it is the opposition that's held to account, not the government. And that'd be cool and trendy, but when you've got a $78 billion deficit growing, and when you have a large number of people can no longer find work, and your economy is in a major trade deficit account, and when there is very little out there that's showing anything that's positive other than something that's being moved by government, when you see developers moving out of the building business, when you see people not able to afford to make ends meet, it's time for us to finally recognize that the way things are going, because it's 2015, of buying ideas, buying media, and paying those to buttress our ideas, as we do, say, for instance, on the climate issue. We have hundreds of climate organizations out there. If they aren't funded by charities that should be subject to strict CRA audits, as they were in the past, or you have organizations which receive money from the Canadian government in order to say what a wonderful job the Canadian government is doing on how they can change the weather by changing the atmosphere. I'm being tongue-in-cheek for good reason, because I don't think there's anything out there that is positive about what we're seeing in Canada unless it's supported directly by taxpayers' dollars. And those taxpayer dollars are becoming dear and they are becoming difficult to come by. When people are complaining that it's 50 or more percent to maintain your standard of living, half of which has to be in taxation, is it any wonder that young people are making the decision that they want to leave this country? There is no future in Canada. And that is the legacy bequeathed by a generation of boomers, and my generation, who said, oh, it's all about me. It's all about my pension. It's all about my home. It's all about my assets. It's all about my value. It's all about how I plan to hold it and make decisions as to, maybe gifting it to somebody. That is not the way to run a country. This is the first generation, Ryan, that I can clearly see, that I know of, that didn't try to do better for the next generation than that which it received from its forerunners. And so I'm very concerned that we have a very selfish motivation towards just about everything we've done here. Everyone's got an angle. In this case, it's all about what's good for number one. And I hate to say it, but I think in the case of all three of these individuals, it's about number one. It is not about the collective responsibility they have, the duty they have to democracy and to the real, true meaning of public representation. It means being selfless about what you're doing, and it's being completely committed to the interests of the people. Walking and changing seats 40 some odd weeks after you were elected sounds to me like you've got an angle and you ought to disclose it.
Well, and this is where I think the Conservatives need to rely on the angle of the university students and the youth vote and the 20 odd somethings, because there's no motivation for the boomers to flip. They don't care about the economy. They don't care about any of this stuff. The boomers that have already voted Liberals, they're going to stay there. There is a lot of boomers that did vote for the Conservatives. They watch our channel, but I think where the Conservatives need to be really focusing their efforts is to A, engaging with the youth vote, and B, trying to convince them that you have to get out and actually vote on voting day. And that's the biggest weakness with that group, is getting involved in federal politics and in getting out there and voting in an election. Do you think that's going to be the key moving forward, is to try to convince these folks that, listen, if you do actually want a house, if you do want a family, if you do want to get married, if you do want to build a life in Canada, you're going to have to go out there and take it. And to be able to do that, you have to vote for a different government in the next election.
I think younger people can break through the artificial, paid for influencers, paid for um, those who have some kind of gravitas and those who have some kind of a platform. I think it's pretty simple for young people to break through that because they share in none of that. And as people of our generation move on, it looks like that's probably where we're going to go. But the damage between now and then could be pretty catastrophic. I list it in terms of the work we're doing on net zero. So whether it's EV mandates that are about to destroy the automotive sector as we know it here in Canada, pursuing a 70% tailpipe reduction. No other country is doing that. No technology exists to do that. The whole purpose is to get more Chinese EVs in our country and completely flood the nation with products from other from that part of the world. That we have very little in the way of manufacturing. We're seeing a complete removal of business confidence in Canada in terms of investing in Canada, the oppressive taxation for those who are trying to make a go of it in Canada, the fact that there is still a lot of disunity between provinces, and that there is still a class of individuals out there who believe it's all about what's good for you and cashing in while the rest of us suffer. I think what will change this, Ryan, is when we start to see serious efforts made by bond rating agencies to correctly downgrade our credit rating and our credit worthiness, given the amount of debt that we have incurred that is not productive, that is not incentivizing or creating or producing both opportunity and investments and revenue generation, which is hurting the country. I think sooner or later, it's going to be, in my view, much sooner, that the pain will be so universal. Even those who want to be trendy and keep their elbows up, and in fact, at a point where many of us are ankles up, I think we have to recognize sooner or later the reality is going to hit them, that there is a serious cost with voting left. That is the Liberal Party, the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc. Keep going down this particular road, and you're going to find there's very little in the way of the nation to recover from the economic morass which it has voted for and confirmed 4 times.